Have you heard of NS bikes? When I think of NS bikes, I think of dirt, jump and slopestyle. They've got riders such as Simon and David Godsiek riding for them. Also, they got what they call the UR team. And here we find riders such as Tracy Hanna and Sam Reynolds. Sam Reynolds released a video a while ago where he was riding the new NS Bikes full suspension sort of enduro bike, the Define. And it seems that's not all NS Bikes has been working on lately. Here is the E-Fine EMTB. I'm not really sure if this bike has been released yet or not. Looking at their webpage, you might think not. They call the bike 1, but searching for the bike on the internet, I can find them for sale on the webshop Bike Mail Order DE. There seems to be two models, the E-Fine 1 and the E-Fine 2. Also, there's a Facebook group, NS Bikes Malta, which first shared this bike back in November of last year. So I don't know if this bike is currently available or not, but it does seem like it exists at least. So let's have a look at the bikes. The E-Fine 2 is the cheaper one, 5,499 euros. It's a 160mm travel bike, they say, as opposed to the E-Fine 1, that's a 170mm travel bike at 6,999 euros. Looking at the specs of the E-Fine 2, it's a bit confusing. It definitely isn't a 13.6 kilos bike, but yeah, I guess the rest could be correct. 11-speed Deore drivetrain, 1146 teeth cassette, the not too impressive RockShox RL35 Gold, decent brakes, but I really don't like the long lever of the Deore MT420 dual caliper brakes. The motor is the old Shimano E7000 with a 504 watt-hours battery. So I guess it's a lightweight bike and yeah, it looks quite interesting. I guess it's just a fork and possibly a couple of brakes away from being a proper hardcore trail bike. But it is of course the E-Fine 1 that is the most interesting bike. This 170mm travel bike comes with a RockShox Seb fork, the RockShox Super Deluxe Select coil shock. And this is properly spec'd with the Shimano EP8 motor and the 630 watt-hours battery. There is an offset headset cup with that will increase or decrease the wheelbase by 10mm, and naturally it will affect the head tube angle as well. Brakes are looking good, the Magura MT7 front and rear, and it's sensibly spec'd with a Shimano Deore 12-speed drivetrain, the M6100. And hopefully this is correct, the weight. It's claimed 22.5 kilos. And yeah, if that's correct, that's quite impressive, considering it's a burly 170mm travel 38mm stanchion fork. It's got really heavy-duty double-down tires, and the battery is fairly big at 630 watt-hours, and it's an aluminium frame. So if that bike in fact weighs 22.5 kilos, I'm quite impressed, and it makes it look a really interesting option. Here is what NS Bikes have to say about this bike. They say they've tested a lot of bikes and they didn't really find the bike that worked for them, so they decided to build their own one. So they asked themselves, what makes an e-bike great? And they decided it's not necessarily the same as with a regular non-motorized bike. So they claim they designed the bike or the suspension to work with this heavier bike with a motor and a battery. And yeah, that's not anything new for e-bikes really. A lot of manufacturers make this claim and it makes sense. And they went Shimano EP8 because they like the motor, and having access to a big service network was of course important. Even though they say they couldn't find a bike that they really fell in love with, the geometry of the E-Fine, it doesn't really look that different to a lot of other 29er EMTBs. And by the way, the E-Fine is a mullet bike, 29er up front, 27.5 at the back. So you might think this bike has got a short rear end, since they got the smaller rear wheel. But yeah, not really. 455mm chainstay is what we usually see on a lot of modern 29er EMTBs. And the rest of the specs look fairly familiar too. The reach on a size medium is 452 millimeters, paired with a fairly tall stack height of 646. This should be a pretty long frame, a long reach, a long bike. The C-tube angle of 75.2 degrees is fairly steep, quite normal these days. Head tube angle of 63.8 degrees. That's, I like that. It's among the slacker bikes on the market today. And it seems this bike only comes in 3 sizes, small, medium and large. Chainstay length has always been sort of interesting to me, because the early MTBs had insanely long chainstays, and this was the one metric that was always improved as the years went by. So why does this bike have 455mm chainstays? Is it because they wanted the long wheelbase, or is it some limitations in the design? And on this bike, it seems they got a crossbar between the chainstays, taking up some space between the rear tire and the motor. So I guess for this particular bike, they couldn't really make it any shorter. But for all I know, that wasn't an issue, because they could very well be happy with 455mm. A lot of riders are, a lot of manufacturers are too. So there you have it. I know nothing about availability, but this bike, the E-Fine 1, looks really interesting. Prices have been going up for all MTBs, so about 7,000 euros for a very sensibly spec'd bike, great suspension and durable drivetrain. It looks really interesting, especially if the stated weight is correct.